Hello everybody, welcome to the seminar Silenced Conflict Memories and Contested Heritages, the case of Istrian Exodus in Slovenia. This seminar is a part of series of seminars, Contested Heritage, Memory and Identity Practices, Eastern European and Global Contexts. Firstly, I would like to remind you that this seminar is recorded and you will be able to see the recording uploaded on the YouTube channel of Vilnius University Faculty of Communication. And a few short rules before we begin. So everybody, please keep your microphone muted during the presentation due to surrounding sounds which might bother all of us. If you're willing to ask a question, feel free to do that in the chat during the talk or after the talk lively. And please respect each other and do not interrupt the speaker. And now I would like to give a word to Kostas Dallas, who is the project leader of which this seminar series is being organized. Kostas.
Hello, hi everyone. First of all, I really very much want to welcome our speaker today, Katja Hrobat Virloget from the Faculty of Humanities in the University of Primorska. Donata is going to introduce Katja after the few words that I wanted to say. We started the Connective Digital Memory in the Borderlands project a couple of years ago, almost 1.5 years ago. And at the time, we hadn't imagined how recent events would make it even so relevant today to study what we aimed initially to study, which is interactions around heritage, around the difficult past on social media that might have an effect on contemporary identities and contemporary attitudes in Lithuania. So this particular sort of field, the field of interaction on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on other social media, become particularly relevant these days when an infowar has been waged against of identity, notions of sovereignty, notions of human rights, and this is weaponizing history in a major way, as we've seen it happen in recent years, but even more so in the very current situation that Europe is facing through the threat that the war and aggression against Ukraine by Russia is representing. So in many ways, I mean, this highlights one important dimension, the dimension that the past, history, memory, the difficult events of European histories and of national histories in our different countries within Europe is very particularly relevant to what happens today, to our perceptions, to our present and our future. And the questions clearly and the issues are not certainly not restricted to Ukraine. They're certainly not restricted to the Baltic states that face a particular threat during these periods, but also face the whole of Europe. Our stories are very different, but also they have common elements. Our past indicates points of convergence and points of divergence, and understanding that past and its various manifestations and aspects of our self-awareness and also our capability of dealing with current threats and establishing and forging a peaceful common future for Europe. So in that sense, this seminar series has been created in order to allow researchers in Lithuania who are interested to and are engaged with research or with education in fields related to heritage, in fields related to identity and identity politics, in communication and how communication shapes our perceptions of the past and our attitudes to the present, can get into contact with stories, with research, with perspectives that come from broader European field. So this is actually the purpose of this seminar series that we're organizing as part of the Connective Digital project. And the only thing that I wanted to say is that in previous seminars, we've seen different perspectives from different places in Europe, researchers and scholars from Denmark, from Greece, have spoken to us about different such stories, and also Norway. And now we're going to Slovenia. We're going to a different part again, sort of focusing again in the Western Balkans and the states of Southeastern Europe that and the European Union that are located in that area of the world. I come myself from Greece, so I have a lot of understanding and a lot of sensitivity regarding all the issues of our complicated histories and how this can shape and forge on our ways of peaceful coexistence within Europe. So with these words, I would like to say I would like to invite everyone to join us in future seminars. Donata has the details. I think she circulated the details. Perhaps, Donata, you might say a couple of things of where people could find details about future events so that they can join us in future events. And I'd like also to acknowledge on behalf of myself, but also my colleagues in the Faculty of Communication of Vilnius University, because Connective is a project that is situated in the Faculty of Communication. It's got something like 9 researchers now that participate at different levels, from full professors to doctoral candidates that participate in our study. I'd like to acknowledge our warm gratitude to the Research Council of Lithuania, which is supporting our work. And with these words, Donata, you have the floor. And I'm very much looking forward to the seminar today. Welcome.
Thank you, Kostas. So a few words about our lecturer, Katja Hrobat Virloget. Pleasure to see you. Thank you for deciding to share your research experience today with us. Katja is a lecturer, a researcher, and also a vice dean for research and head of the Department of Anthropology and Cultural Studies at the Primorska University. Her research interests include migration and population movements, anthropology of memory, heritage studies, narrative tradition, landscapes, and interdisciplinary research. And today, Katja will present us her research, which was published as a book entitled In the Silence of Memory, Egzodas Istrijoje, which on the basis of individual and collective memories deals with a taboo subjects in Slovenian history, the so-called exodus of the mostly Italian population from Istria after the Second World War. So Katja, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Donata. Thank you, Gostis, for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be with you. I will present the book, but that will be translated this year in English and in Italian. It will be published by Bergam Books. And I will try to focus more on memories and heritage, as I saw it's the focus of your project. First, you see where is Istria. It's a contested land that in the 20th century changed 5 states. It's by the Italian, Slovenian, Yugoslavian border. First, it experienced the Austro-Hungarian Empire, then the Italian kingdom with a very violent fascist regime. And in this time of the 23 years, there were massive migrations because of the fascistic violence against the Slovenians and Croats. Around 105,000 Slovenes and Croatians escaped from this region. Well, a bit larger is the region. After the World War II, this region became a contested region between Italian and Yugoslavian demands. And for 10 years, it was formed a free territory of Trieste. It means like a buffer zone, a neutral zone between Italia and Yugoslavia. And in this time, the exodus happened. So it was divided in two zones. One is the zone A, that was under the Allied forces, and the zone B under Yugoslav forces. And in 1954, it was then annexed, the zone A to Italy and the zone B to Yugoslavia. What we call Eastern Exodus happened from the time after the war, let's say, some years before, and till this annexation of these territories to Italy or Yugoslavia. From 90% of Italians that were living in this region before World War II, in 1957, only 10% remained, mostly in the Istrian towns in Slovenia, and they became a national minority. So from the whole Istria, that is also in Croatia, emigrated around 200 or 300,000 people. They were predominantly Italians, but also some Slovenians and Croatians. In the Slovenian part that I study, it's 28,000 people, 70% of them were Italian, 30% of Slovenians and Croatians. There was also a kind of contra-exodus, but only with a minor number of people, between 2,000 and 10,000 people. And these were Italians who came from Italy, mostly workers in the socialistic belief who built socialism. So the empty space was resettled by immigrants from, just to see the chat if it's something, okay. The empty space was resettled by immigrants from inner Slovenia and Yugoslavia, and so this meant a total transformation of ethnic, social, and cultural face of Istria. In the census in the 60s, in Istria, they were registered 49% of native residents, only 33% in urban areas. It means that all other people were the settlers, the new settlers. So the consequence of these massive population transfers, so the Italians escaping mostly in Italy and Yugoslavians and Slovenians coming to this territory, was the ethnic homogenization of the contested lands on both sides of the border, because the Italians were settled on the Slovenian-Italian multicultural region in Italy, so they Italianized this region, and with the Yugoslavians on the Yugoslavian side, they Yugoslavianized the Yugoslav territory that before it was multicultural. There are two interpretative frameworks for these migrations. Historian Philip Ter speaks about population transfers that were typical for the post-war world, Europe, under Allies politics, which wanted to prevent further ethnic conflicts. So massive migrations were executed under the Allied politics with the reason to prevent these ethnic conflicts and to ethnically homogenize the territories. And here enters also the story of Ukraine and Poland and Germans. Around 10 million of Germans had to flee away from Central and Eastern Europe. And among them, these 200 or 300,000 Italians. It depends who counts them, or Italy or Slovenia, let's say, or Croatia. The other theoretical framework is of Pamela Bellinger. She speaks about the post-imperial frame, She says that with the defeat of fascism, Italy lost newly acquired African and Balkan territories. So she links more, not so much with the population transfers that were typical for the afterwar, but more with the post-imperial frame. Regarding the interpretation of this exodus, we have conflicting national memories. I'm the first Slovenian to use the term exodus because the Slovenians and also Croatians interpret these migrations as opting, because these migrants had they mostly as usual migrations, because the migrants had the possibility to legally choose their nationality. So if they choose the Italian nationality, they had to migrate in the time of 1 year to Italy. And so the Slovenian and Croatian historians call these migrants optants, and they are claiming it's all on the free will, because they had the chance to choose the nationality and where they would live. They call this migration emigration, and they always argue there were diverse ethnicities. So not only Italians, but also Slovenians and Croats, and we will see about this hybrid identity later. While the Italian state has a totally different vision of these migrations. The migrants are called esuli, and esuli means refugees. The migrations is called exodo, so exodus, and they see it only as a mononational process, so only Italians would migrate. And here we have also the conflict victimization. So this esuli feel victim of the Slavic and communist barbarism, while the Slovenians and Croatians feel victims of Italian imperialism, of decades of violent fascism and denationalization processes, and of World War II occupation. But here, counting the ethnicities, it doesn't make really sense, because in this region where everybody knew to speak or Italian or Croatian or Slovenian, we speak about hybrid ethnic identities. Also here, in this environment, to opt in this multicultural environment, with most of people being bilingual, meant also to declare a nationality for the sake of convenience. So if you declared yourself that you're Italian, you got the Italian national help as a refugee. So also many Slovenians and Croatians, or all these bilingual people, define themselves as Italians for the sake of convenience. And in this region, we observe the changeability of ethnic identities through the past as strategies for survival and for the adaptation to higher social status. So if you declared yourself to be Italian in the fascism, it was better. And the same was later in Yugoslavia, the Italians, the ones who remained, because 10% of the Italian population remained. If they declared to be Yugoslavian, it was also better for them. You will also understand why. So, as an informant told me, Istrians paid no attention to national affiliation and did not opt to live on national grounds alone. It wasn't only the Italians who opted, there were also Croatian Istrians and others, regardless of their nationality. Many members of my family left. My family, although Croatian, considered themselves Istrian and were never driven by a sense of nationality. So here, it's the regional identity is very strong, Istrians. As a Slovenian Istrian explained me, before we didn't call ourselves Slovenians. If you are born in Italy, you are Italian, because here was Italy before. If you are born in Austria, before was Austria here, but here we were Istrians. But the people from Piran, they called everyone outside Piran Chavi. It means slaves. Consider them to belong to some other nation, not theirs. They treated us like peasants. So here we can see that the people rely here on regional identity to escape the national identity. But we saw a kind of social class conflict that that became the same as ethnic conflict, because mostly in the cities, in the towns, lived Italians, and there is this conflict against the Slavs, or let's say rural barbaric people. And there is this conflict between urban Italians, that would mean civilized, again against rural, barbaric, and Slav. So mostly the towns were inhabited by Italians, where the hinterland were Slovenians and Croats. This is also due to the 20 years of fascism, where the Slovenian Croatian language and nation were forbidden. And at that one also the fascist time interrupted with the Italianization of Slovenians and Croats, interrupted this the growing of Slovenian and Croatian identity in the towns. And the 2 decades of fascist enforced Italianization and violence, war crimes, provoked the mutual enmity of Italians and Slovenes. So both identities were also consolidated, and they were also strengthened by the during World War II. And as we know, as Bart says, ethnic identity proves to be the strongest in borderlands and becomes crucial when it's under threat. As somebody said, there was a lot of hostility that Italian or the Italians looked at this chavo like the slave. When I started this research on the reason of Exodus, because it's a taboo topic by us, as is in Slovenia, in Northern Croatia, is interpreted as voluntary migrations. We don't have anything in the national books, in the school curriculum, anything about this. Also, the population change in the eastern town was total, the ethnic change. So when I started to research this topic, I bumped into a silence, especially the silence of the Italians who remained. There are 10% of Italians who remained. And why is this silence? Because of the incompatibility of memories. When individual memories do not correspond to the collective image of the past, they are excluded from collective memory, as Hallbach said. So these memories of the remained Italians are incompatible with Slovenian memory, who sees these migrations as voluntary migrations or as the defeat of fascism, but they are also incompatible with the Italian memory, because in contrast to the Italians, the remained Italians are aware of the causal link with the 20 years of fascistic violence, which Italian national discourse overlooks. So the Italians which remained are clearly aware between the link of the fascism and Exodus, let's say, and the revenge, we can say. What the Italian discourse deny, because the usual Italian discourse starts the history from 33, so excluding the 23 years of violent fascism that was happening in these places. So as an Italian informant here said to me, shifting things now about Exodus is like placing a mine and not knowing when it will explode. And the other said, better be quiet, there are plenty of ears everywhere. So speaking about Exodus was a taboo in Istria, even among Italians. The tabooization started with the democratization in the 90s, but still today is very much persistent. So after the Exodus, the environment, especially in the towns, totally changed, and Italians, which were before the majority of population, became the minority. They became others, marginalized, although they were officially protected as a national minority. So here also we have the dichotomy between winners and losers. So losers as the Italians, not having the right for mourning or for their memories, let's say. So as an Italian told me, I remember wandering at home in 54 and 55, how there were 43 of us in the class during the first year, and every day someone went missing. I would return home and ask, Mom, Vinicio, Lucio, Maria are all gone. Where did they go? Ah, they will come back, you will see. She would reply, my mother. I was young, we lived in isolation, but I tell you, I only discovered the Exodus when I read the books of Tomica. Nobody talks about that. So these migrations were happening in, let's say, in silence, because nobody spoke about this. And the silence here comes not only because of the conflict of memories, but also because the memory hurts. As an Italian told me, my family at that time has halved in two parts and has never merged again. It's a wound that has never healed. And then she began to cry. So we know that silence is not an absence of memory, but an active avoidance of it. And here, this silence is a kind of avoiding an emotional trauma, not only incompatible in conflict memories with the dominant one, but also the emotional trauma, because as you will see further, the Italians lost everything. The Italians who remained, they lost all their social ties, all the families. They became stigmatized. They were treated as fascists. So a totally change of environment with the language and everything. And we can say, as Ballinger and Michel Besson say, that this silence is the silence of the excluded from history. It's not only the remained who are silent about these topics, but also the newcomers, so the Slovenian and, let's say, people from other republics of Yugoslavia, because in the perception of the Yugoslavian collective memory, or let's say Slovenian, this Istria was always Slovene. So, but it doesn't go with the empty territory they were migrated in. They realized that it was not really Slovene. So the Slovenian silence comes also from this conflict of memory with the dominant one. And there are also the migrants who are on the other side of Italy, although now they became, from the 90s on, their memory became the official memory of Italia. The problem is always here that they deny the 20 years of fascistic violence, being only the victim. So about silence, if Hallberg says that the collective identity is based on collective memory, we can say, especially talking about the Italians, that the Italian identity of the remained Italian, their identity lies on collective silence. So with these conflicting memories, we have a political instrumentalization of selective past. There is also this conflict of who is the victim, who is the perpetrator, what to remember, what to forget on the national and regional level. We have the competitive victimhood on national levels. And as I showed, both nations feel victims of the other. And we have this expressed in the national holidays, which are bearers of collective memory. So the Italians have established a commemoration day of Exodus and Phoebe, where they are remembering this massive exodus, but omitting the 20 years of violent fascism before the exodus, and they derive from their myth of Italiani brava gente. It means Italians good people. While the Slovenians made a similar memory day, let's say, a day of return of this Istrian region to Slovenia, to the motherland. But here too, in Slovenia, the memory of Exodus is omitted, and both they lie in the victimization. There were some reconciliation attempts. They were in 2010 and 2020. The presidents of Italy and Slovenia going to the National Lieu de Mémoire, so on the Slovenian and Italian side. And there even was established a Slovenian-Italian joint historical commission about this event, but nothing really happened. And in these conflict memories, we have dissonant heritage in political discourses. So as we know, countries that have carried out population transfers have silenced their presence or rewritten the history, while migrants refuse to forget as means of the political power. So in Slovenia, there is no knowledge of the population change in Slovenia, nowhere, except now lately, this last year was published my book that was sold in 4 months, because it was such a novelty for Slovenians. And we have here the conflict about the Italian stolen artworks from Eastern cities. So in the time of fascism, the artworks from Eastern cities were stolen and taken to Italy. And there we have big national conflicts today of to whom belong these artworks. So, or to the place of their origin, to Istria, or to the people, so let's say to Italians who have migrated to Italian. And there is a big and unresolved conflict today about this. And this dissonant conflict memories resound in political power too. When Slovenia was trying to enter the European Union, the Italia conditioned with the Azulis property the entrance of Slovenia to European Union. So Slovenia and Croatia had to pay all the heritage that the Italians left in Slovenia, while the war damage of also there was then from Slovenian and Croatian part demands to pay the war damage caused by 20 years of fascism and of Italian occupation during World War II. So in Slovenian collective memory, these are called voluntary migrations. And in this book, I put this under question. It's true that we don't have in any archives any sources of the intentional cleansing of the Italians, because in the Italian interpretations, it's about the Exodus is the result of the cleansing of the Italians. So there's no sources that would speak about this, in contrast to the 10 millions of Germans from the Central and Eastern Europe. Then there is somewhere we can see some encouragement of migrations, even done by Italians who had to show their loyalty to the new communistic system. So Italian pushing Italians to go, to flee away. And on the other side, we also have a lot of rejection of applications for migration. So rejections to declare the Italianness of people who wanted to declare Italianness. And there were changes also according to time. After 1948, there was the important Inform Bureau conflict, when the Italian communists voted against Tito for Stalin, and this was a big split. Since then, it seems the system, the regional regime encouraged more the migrations. There was also the politics of Slovenian and Italian brotherhood, but it seems it was not so effective as the words seem. So what are more the reasons and what lies behind these voluntary migrations, let's say? One strong reason is the collective criminalization of Italians as fascists. So even if the Italians were anti-fascist and fighting with the Slovenian, Croatian, Yugoslav partisans against the fascism, in the Yugoslavian memory, the Italians have been collectively criminalized for the 20 years of fascistic violence and the war occupation. And the collective criminalization of Italians, especially especially hurting the Italian anti-fascists which remain, because the ones who remained were mostly people who believed in the socialistic system. So there is also the stories of in the Yugoslavian perception, there were, let's say, false Italians. So the Italians who had Slavic surnames, in their perception, they had to be helped to regain the Slavic identity. And so they were forced to go to Slovenian and Croatian school, even if they didn't know to speak Slovenian and Croatian. This was happening 20 years ago when the Slovenian and Croatian language was forbidden in the time of fascism, and the Slovenian and Croatian children had to go to the Italian schools. So there was a lot of intimidation of Italians, and Italians were afraid of the revenge measures for the fascist and war violence. And we can here see different memories. So the memories of the exiles, if you compare them to the memories of the remained Italians, are mostly frozen in fear. They're really frightened about, a big fear remained in their memories. While in the Italian memories, you could see that they successfully adapted to the new social environment, and there is no fear anymore, because these memories were not frozen with the exile. So there are also, especially the Yugoslavian historians, Slovenian and Croatian, speak about economic reason. There were for migration, so there were severe economic condition. The reason were socialist coercive measures against the richer parts of population, and the richer part of population was mostly Italian. So the confiscation of private property, prohibition of traveling trade, distribution of expropriated land, constitution of workers' cooperative, and so on. A big reason was also language shift. From Italian, 23 years before it was forbidden to speak Slovenian and Croatian, while with the Yugoslavian administration, the Slovenian entered as an official language, and mostly the Italians didn't know to speak it. There was also a strong Italian anti-Yugoslav propaganda to come to Italy to escape from the Tito's regime. And there were other economic reasons. The especially strong was the closure of the borders, Italian-Yugoslavian border, and with this, the closure of the link with Trieste as the main regional economic center. So people who wanted to maintain jobs in Trieste and the artisans and all this were afraid to remain on the other side of the border and cut from the main regional center. And a lot of people migrated also because of trying to preserve the family links. So a strong reason is the feeling of becoming foreigners at their own home, because this environment, due to exodus, has changed socially and politically, So the Italians, with the exodus, with more and more people going away, they lost all of their social network. There was a new dominant language that they didn't know to speak mostly, and especially they were stigmatized as fascists. So they had this negative perception. So Italians that they didn't know to speak both languages were losing jobs, and they were socially and economically excluded. And some Italians also migrated because they did not accept the reversal of power relations from the dominant fascism to the ones who were subordinated in the time of Yugoslavia. But it seems that more migrants were from the towns, because they were mostly Italian towns, and in the towns they were not used to the co-ethnic cohabitation, and they were afraid of these Slavs. While the hinterland, it was more multicultural, so the Italians from the hinterland knew to speak also Slovenian and Croatian. So we can speak of the indirect pressures. The Italians felt intimidated and saw no future at home, as for many cases of the population transfers that were not forced. And so the historians still speak, the Slovene and Croatian historians speak about the voluntariness, and it's true, but so 90% of the Italian population emigrated on the legal level. But my researchers found out that if we look into individual experiences, they were really complex and difficult decisions. And we can say that these Italians were pushed towards a voluntary choice. But here we have still to remember that there is still this 10% of the Italians which remained and became the officially recognized minority. Who stayed among these Italians? In fact, these 10% of the Italians had to have more courage to decide not to live with the crowds. Mostly they remained because the attachment to the place, to their home. Mostly they were not involved in any ideological political system. Mostly the Italians who didn't live were from rural areas where they were more used to co-ethnic cohabitation, and it was easier for them to adapt to the new system and to the new language. And most of the families who remained were anti-fascist, socialist families, believing in the socialist ideas, but later they were disappointed that the nationalism defeated the internationalist socialist idea. So it was mostly the intellectuals who left. As an Italian told me, everyone has gone, engineers, doctors, teachers. Only those who couldn't afford to live and had no education remained. And here we have also a split in the family. Mostly some of them wanted to go, the others not. And there is the case of this Italian. My mom wanted to leave, and my dad also, he had some problems with the party, didn't want to leave. He never stopped believing that what was going on were only mistakes on the way to socialism, to communism, and that everything would sooner or later be fine, that there was no way nationalism could prevail. So they remained. Some of them stayed also because of the catastrophic condition in the refugee centers and the negative reception of the refugees in Italy, as they were perceived, also in Italy, they were perceived mostly as fascists. And this negative perception shattered the promises of a better life of the Italian propaganda. So as a father, as somebody says, of among more Italian informators, I'm not going there. I have my own house. The worst that can happen to me is that they kill me. To live as a prisoner life there, out of the question. That's why we stayed. So because these migrants, when they went to Italy, they remained 10 or 15 years still in the refugee centers in Italy. And we have also people who, after migration, after being in this horrible condition in the refugee centers in Italy, returned home. returned to Istria back. There is a case of a fisherman in Koper. After a week in a transit camp in Italy, they returned and taught farmers from a nearby village how to fish, because the knowledge was lost after the Italians had left. So mostly of the Italians were fishermen, and most of these people migrated. So this family who came back then has taught the other farmers of the Slovenian origin how to make the fishing. So Italians, they felt at home, but foreigners. So even if they didn't migrated, they stayed at home. In this new environment, they felt foreigners. Due to the change in social and political circumstances, loss of social network and new dominant language, they were collectively held responsible for war crimes and decades of violent fascistic politics. Their memories and heritage were silenced and neglected. And there was the change of relation of power from the dominant ones from the time of fascism to subordinated. And the Italians holding socialist affiliation were bitterly disappointed by the Yugoslavian nationalism. As an Italian told me, she came from Croatian part of Istria to Slovenia. We had rights, all of them, but my town has nevertheless changed. All the names were in Croatian, nothing in Italian, of course. I can't recall feeling a foreigner in my own country back then, but later, certainly. So here we can see that the concept of the foreigners is not linked only to geographic origin or to territory, but can be related to community appartenance and someone's limited access to local resources. The ability to access local resources or not depends on the belonging to a community. So here we have the cases of the Italian farmers who narrate the loss of their clients because the new inhabitants refused to buy products from the stereotyped fascists. So as these Italians couldn't sell anymore their products as they were perceived as fascist, they had, in fact, to live for economic reasons. And these economic reasons were tightly linked with the stigmatization. So in the Yugoslavian perception, there is also a small part of good and honest Italians. This means the anti-fascists and the supporters of the socialist system. And then they became suspect after the crisis of the Cominform in 1948, when Italian communists in this zone were massively opting against Tito's party for Stalin. And these Italians perceived as good and honest, they had to demonstrate their loyalty to Yugoslavia by participating in the political battle for the annexation to Yugoslavia. As a son of an Italian who migrated from Italy, he was partisan and he was saved by Yugoslavia. And this one told me, my father was a communist, an Italian. He was very grateful to Yugoslavia and had no anti-Yugoslav inclinations. Still, he was expected to participate in the cleansing, to go from door to door and talk to Italians into living, so to persuade Italians to leave. So here we have the processes of emigrations and immigrations, which were interrelated. First, in the time of this buffered zone, neutral zone of the free territory of Trieste, there were only sporadic migrations. Before this area was annexed to Yugoslavia, only here and there some family decided to leave. But after 1954, when the Yugoslavia got this half of the territory, there were really massive migrations. So people speak that like from 60 pupils or 2 classes of pupils in one class, next year it remained only 3 of them. And how it was then the immigration? when the environment was still Italian, the first immigrants were the bilingual. So it means the Slovenians or Croatians who were from this region, who spoke already the Italian language, who were used to live with the Italians. And there were also a lot of Slovenians which in the time of fascism escaped from the fascistic violence in Yugoslavia, and then they returned to Istria. Also them, they were bilingual, living with Italians before. Especially bilingual teachers were coming, because after the annexation of this territory to Yugoslavia, they had to newly establish Slovenian and Croatian schools, which were in the time of fascism destroyed. But with the massive migration after 1954, these places remained suddenly empty. And then it was happened what we call really the exodus. So it means really the massive migrations. And in this time, people speak, Slovenian immigrants speaks about the bunch of keys. So they were coming to these towns, and they got a bunch of keys, and from these keys they had to choose an apartment where they would live. And the local authority were inviting people with some privileges to this Wild West. Just to mention that new social boundaries were made in this society. So we have very different groups of people with conflict memories, collective memories. So we have the immigrants from local environments, so it means from Slovenia and Croatia, which were mostly bilinguals. Then we have the immigrants from continental Slovenia, who didn't speak Italian, and for them Italians were strangers, and the immigrants from ex-Yugoslavia, so outside the Slovenian Republic. And then we have the difference also between the Italians. We have the remained Italians and the Italians who immigrated from Croatia or from Italy in this contra-exodus. And then we have also Italians from the interethnic families. So as we saw in the beginning, the symbolic boundaries were first based on the ethnic elements. It means Italians, civilized, urban, against Slavs, barbaric, rural. That was the time before the Exodus. And this conflict changed after Exodus on the basis of the primacy of living in the place. So it means the ones who came or who were living in this place before, or they came before, they felt superior with the migrants that came later. And here a boundary was made that was not ethnically based, but it was on the base of this who is first who arrived, let's say. And here we have conflict between Eastern Italians against the newcomers, all of the newcomers, or the Eastern Italians who, with the first bilingual Slovenians, feel superior against the newcomer from former Yugoslavian republics. And like we can say them non-Istrians in their perception of the Balkan times. And there is this clear orientalizing discourse. As Slovenian bilingual immigrant told to me about this new population that is coming. So a different culture breaks in. There were fewer differences, much fewer, between us, Slovenians and Italians, who actually lived in the same territory. But then a completely different culture strikes. They were picking people there in villages, you know, there were herdsmen. You brought people, sheep herds, more or less, and you put them in a highly developed urban environment. So here is a clear boundary against the Yugoslav immigrants. So the Slovenians and Italians together against in the orientalizing discourse, we can say. So whose home is today Istria? Italians are at home, but they feel foreigners. Then the first Slovenians, the bilingual Slovenians, feel here as at home, but they miss the intergenerational links. They are only taking roots in this new environment. There were a lot of people saying me about the discovering of the broken porcelain around their houses. And we can say that they were with this porcelain that Italians couldn't take with them because it's too fragile. They were discovering the silence alternative past in the hegemonic socialist new version of the past, or the past of the vanished other, so the fascists. And then we have the settlers from ex-Yugoslavia, and them they feel as foreigners on their own. They feel they have two homes, the one of the region and the new home. They are seen by Slovenians and Italians as others, but they do not all feel as much others as they are perceived. What about place attachment and heritage here? As an informant, an immigrant of Slovenian origin that came, one of the first, he said, that's what we miss here where we stayed. The connections, the stories, knowing what happened here in this house, for example, who lived here. These ties have been broken when the majority left. That's why we don't have any attitude, let's say, towards certain buildings. If it was about our ancestors, it would be different. So here we can see that they're taking roots in this environment. A difference can be say also that some people are living with and some people are living by the sea. And the sea here is the main element. And some of the immigrants, especially the ones coming from the interior of Yugoslavia, never really established the connection with the sea. As somebody told, when I came here, I got frightened of the sea, this immensity. I have never seen so much water before. I could not even breathe like a fish on dry land. I got so much scared of this immense water. So this is in clear contrast with the Italians, mostly fishermen, who had the tradition of living with the sea, while the other mostly they live by the sea. The sea is only the touristic facade. About heritage today, and especially the Venetian heritage of this town, is an anchor of the Italians' identity. So Italian nostalgic memories on good old times are materialized in the urban landscape, a symbol of the Eastern Italian identity, predating the total visual, ethnic, linguistic, economical break after World War II. They identify with the Venetian heritage, which gives them the emotional support, a continuity in the new social environment, and they are wounded by new architectural intervention or just looking at the heritage decay. Here we can say that the processes of non-heritagization are, and this reflects the complex relations of power. Demolition, heritage devalorization implies a logic of making invisible, denying the memories of those who identify with heritage, and symbolic violence. Because as you see on the picture, this Venetian heritage is not properly maintained. And it's clearly seen that these people who live today in this Venetian heritage have not established an emotional link with these buildings. And here we have a saying of an Italian about how she suffers when she sees this decaying of heritage. The palace, it has been in reconstruction for so long, but it's always closed, abandoned. They don't take any care of it. The same goes for many things in Cappadocia. So they have no sensibility for the local, and they bring things from other environments. Here it's seen clearly the symbolic boundary with the others. So in these competing heritage discourses, Italian memories and heritages are as alternative marginal heritage discourse. We can say that through the heritage, they try to demonstrate their anxiousness, their local identity. We can say that heritage is used as a scream of the silence of the Italian memories, and it's an evidence of the primacy of their legitimacy. because they proclaimed the old cemeteries with the Italian families as cultural heritage in Slovenia, and also their Italian Veneto-Istrian dialect. It's also registered in the Register of the Intangible Heritage of Slovenia. So we can see that the heritage can be a claim for legitimacy. So we have different questions of discontinuities, reinvention, appropriation, and so on. Mostly this heritage is abandoned of this Venetian urban heritage. And this is due to the lack of identification of the majority of today's population with the living environment, because the new population, they don't identify with this heritage. And most of these new inhabitants are the descendants of the economically deprived Yugoslavian working class. And with the independence of Slovenia, they experienced deep social marginalization. They became second-class citizens and without minority rights, and most of them, a lot of 26,000 of them were even erased. So we have a lot of discontinuity of intangible heritage. I will not speak about this. We have through heritage the national appropriation of space. So they introduced the Slovenian folklore dances and costume and the new architecture. And these new Slovenian immigrants felt more Slovenians than the native Slovenian Istrians, because they had this Italian Istrian dialect. And it's clearly seen also the Slovenization of Istrian personal name, of toponyms, introducing Slovenian language, and so on. So people were caught once again, as in the time of fascism, in coercive national identifications in the framework of changing states that left no room for fluid and hybrid identities. And in the 2020, there was a new initiative. They were restoring old place names, which is the base for future multiculturalism and a better interethnic cohabitation by recognizing the silent past. So we have the old Italian names and the changed Slovenian name with always the Italian translation, because it's a bilingual area. And here we have a clear burden of ethnical identity. So people in this region are burdened by the past ethnical conflicts of the fascism, communism, exodus, changing ethnic identities as strategies of survival. So they're longing for the future when the ethnical divisions would be overpassed. As an Italian told me, I really hope that the day will come that no one will have to remind me that I'm Italian. I don't know who a few days ago told me, but who are you, Vittoria? Italian, Slovenian? I'm Daniela. I do not want to be neither one, neither the other. Enough. I'm Vittoria. So really enough. So we have clear, I'm finishing now, the burden of the past. We have irreconcilable memory due to fascism and exodus, difficult and undigested past. How to live together with these negative legacies from the past, how to live with all this debt. We have the burden of the officially unrecognized fascistic violence, and which the remained Italians experience, because it's them who are then stigmatized as fascist. And because of this, they have the tendency to remain invisible. As an Italian commented, it was an Italian concentration camp. I was so ashamed. I walked those streets. I was even ashamed to speak Italian. I admit fascism, and I have to apologize countless times. It hurts me when I see what he did. But what was done wrong needs to be considered on the other side as well. So what to do here? Is there possible to construct a common memory? As Asman would say, it's possible when we confront ourselves with our own memory and listen with empathy to others. So here would be, we have to give the voice to the silence, which are not accepted neither from the one, neither from the other national memory. So neither Slovenian, neither Italian, the ones who stayed, the ones who came, and the ones who left. And my book is, I'm really finishing now, is a kind maybe it's an attempt to start to heal these wounds by unsilencing and giving voice to all of sides. If some people commented, like an Italian journalist, giving voice to those who have remained and to those who have come, exposing the wounds of a territory where a real catharsis still seemed far away. And as a Slovenian psychoanalyst from Italian side commented, the paradox, however, is that when these changes are light and usually traumatic, they cause ego paralysis and regression. Right when the ego should be heavily involved in adapting to major and painful changes. Great traumas require their time to create the condition for their recovery, even a few generations. The Slovene cross-border community is thus trapped in a marble monument erected to itself as a victim. As an Italian vicemayor said, vicemayor in Slovenia, it's only after reading the book that I realized how we were all of our life brought up to be silent. And to finish, what to do with these hires or heritage of the silence? What does mean the public recognition of silence derived from traumas and conflict of memories? What does this mean for people? As psychoanalysts argue, something can be erased, in this case the pain, which produces silence, only when it has been first activated, recognized, and then transferred to the conscious. If an ethnologist articulates what was previously unrecognized, neutralized, and place it in a broader social context, can this process have the function of healing past collective and individual traumas? Thank you for your attention. With this reflection, I will finish. I will stop the screen share.
Thank you, Katja. That was really interesting. And as Rimvidas noticed in the chat, it is similarities can be found to the Vilnius region and Polish community in Lithuania before World War II, after the World War II, and now. So it seems like your research can inspire a different view to overall European changes after the World War, because in quite a lot of places, social structures changed after the war because people were moving. So this can be adopted as a good example to investigate other regions in Europe. And we also have a question from Kostas in the chat. I think I will just read it loud for everybody. So Kostas is writing, fascinating talk, Katja. I apologize for having to leave for another meeting. I was wondering what effect might Slovenia's EU accession and affiliation with Europe, allegiance to the European project, feelings of European identity might play onto perceptions of the troubled story of Italian exiles. Also, to what extent the obvious and common stereotypical identifications, example, Italians as fascists, may interact with official counter-narratives, example, the findings of Italian-Slovenian Commission during the early 2000s, which, to my understanding, appointed blame to the violence in Istria both to Italian fascists and Yugoslavian partisans, in effect politicizing the root of violence and removing the responsibility from the national collective. Thank you again. So, would you agree with Kostas, what Kostas said?
Yeah, the problem is always, as I see now with this book, the problem is always the politicization of the suffering of people. I was surprised to see this big success of this book. I was really afraid how it will be accepted among the people, because it speaks really about a taboo subject. And the book was sold in 4 months, with people asking me to do the same research on other conflict memories with which we are living, just because for the first time, I think the people didn't feel subordinated to politics, because this book showed all equal voices, all people's trauma, and with no black and white politics behind. The problem, as we see also now in Ukraine and everywhere, is that these people really, these deep sufferings and deep silences are used by politicians for conflicts and war. And because, you know, it's true that this Slovenian-Italian commission made a big job. They managed to find a compromise between their different Italian and Slovenian interpretation, but this report was never published in Italy. So in Slovenia, yes, in Italy, not. So it's clear that the politicians want to maintain the conflict visions because it's better to govern with the conflicts. And I think it's our role of the researchers to put these human histories out of the politics, the misuse of the politics. I think this is our role. Mm. And yeah, it's the same with the entrance of the European Union, and it's really, I think, then when people identify with these stories and they see all these conflicts not in the black and white picture as they are perceived in politics, then they have more empathy towards the other. And I think is then the healing can start, by recognizing the memories of each other.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. And our previous lecturer, Katrin Pabst, talked about the Norwegian silent memories, and it was also the outcome of their research that only when you start to talk, you can truly heal the traumas which difficult history has made. Does anybody else have a question? Feel free to raise your hand if so. And I have one. At the beginning of the lecture, you mentioned that people were feeling Istrians. So that was their identity. And then after all this mess began with the migration and extremely difficult historical events and things. But what about today? Do you have any notion about current identity in Istrian region? Is it possible to recover Istrian identity, or people are so divided that they will never feel like the part of the same community again?
Well, it depends from which perception you see. Istria is today the only region in Slovenia that has problems with its name, because of this population change. So it was historically always called Istria, and with the people who migrated from internal Yugoslavia and Slovenia, a new name came, meaning coast, Obala, coast. So this is a perception from the interior. And even today, it's a big discussion on what's the official name of Istria, and this really shows the problem of identity. And the Slovenians, still today, they didn't stop to Slovenize this territory, because they don't want that the name remains Istria, but they want to declare it Slovenian Istria. and because we have also the part in Croatia.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a clear Slovenization, and the Italians now are trying, also because reading of my book, how for decades and decades have been silenced, maybe they have a bit also get some courage to speak now, and they're trying now to go against this Slovenian Istria. This is a problem now. And about the identity, there is still a strong Istrian identity here. But the problem here is that this Istrian identity means Slovenian and Italian, while most of the people who came from the ex-republics of Yugoslavia, and they're a big percentage of them, they're excluded. So in this Eastern identity, it's hybrid, let's say, identity, but still they have an orientalizing discourse in excluding all from the Yugoslavian part. So even this, on one way, seems the Eastern identity like overcoming the national limitness, the limiting nationalism, but still is an orientalizing discourse.
Okay, thank you for your answer. And I have one more question about heritage. We saw the abandoned heritage, the Italian heritage. But when we have conflicts between different society groups regarding the same objects or heritage objects, sometimes it comes to willingness to demolish some kind of heritage and build something of their own. I mean, just to build the mark of their presence in the place of the old buildings. Is something like that happening in Istria? Because we saw the abandoned heritage, and it looks like they just don't care about it. But are people who live today willing to place their own objects instead of the old ones?
I wanted to see if I have a picture to show you, but it seems no, I don't have. Yeah, it's this one. Do you show it? Do you see it? So is this to Slovenize the territory? It was also parallel studies are going on from Neža Čebron-Lipovec, who is an art historian, who is demonstrating how this territory was Slovenized with the new architecture. So here you see the old town, and with all these new buildings showing the new identity, the Slovenian identity, the social identity of this town. So here in some towns, massive new constructions were made, and we know that architecture is always the language of the ideologic systems. So yes.
Okay, so the same as as in other countries.
Yes.
Yeah, so it seems like there isn't any recipe for preserving dissonant heritage objects in the times when the political systems or I don't know, people are changing or identities are changing. So it seems like the heritage will always be a thing which can be changed according to the identity which you are feeling.
Yeah, well, the heritage is always the means of communication of one ideologic systems. You have still the alternative heritage discourses. So there are cases here when heritage was used as to connect people. So it's let's say it's the immaterial heritage, let's say, of the carnivals. Here the Italians had the strong carnival tradition, and the first Slovenian immigrants were telling me that when they came, they were integrated by the Italians in this Italian traditions. So heritage can serve as something to, as a means to divide, but at the same time, in some alternative sense, it can also connect. It depends on people there.
Okay, so since we don't have any questions, and it's a very nice ending for the lecture about the heritage which can connect different people and different identities. So I would really like to thank you, Katja, for this interesting talk. I would like to thank everybody who were listening. I would also like to remind that we will have upcoming lectures the next for the next few months. So just follow us, follow Vilnius University Faculty of Communication on Facebook. Wait for the recording of this lecture on the YouTube, and thank you, and see you next month.
Thank you to all. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.